My name is Sabrina Cole. I'm 29, and tonight I'm standing completely frozen in the center of a ballroom at the Wilshire Grand Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The chandeliers are glittering, the guests are laughing politely, and the only sound that truly pierces through the fog in my brain is the sharp, clipped voice of my stepmother Vanessa echoing through the mic. "You're just a waitress," she says loudly, loud enough to draw the attention of nearly everyone in the room. "Are you lost, Sabrina? Or are you here to refill the champagne?" Laughter ripples through the crowd like poison dropped in a fountain. My cheeks burn. People are staring, whispering, raising eyebrows. Some even have their phones out. I can hear the soft mechanical click of someone recording. In her red designer gown, Vanessa stands poised like a queen beside the auction table, a flute of vintage rosé in one hand, smugness in the other. She turns slightly toward the guests, performing her cruelty with the grace of a woman who's always known how to twist the knife while smiling. Security she calls sweetly as if requesting dessert. I think one of the catering staff might have gotten confused about the guest entrance. There's a pause, a long, awkward silence that makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand. Somewhere near the front entrance, I see a tall man in a black suit begin walking toward me, hotel security no doubt summoned like some obedient foot soldier of society's elite. I can't move. I can't breathe. The walls feel like they're closing in around me. I look down at my navy satin gown, elegant, tasteful, custom-made by a local designer whose work I curate at the gallery. I wore it tonight with pride, knowing it represented independence, not indulgence. But now, under the stares of these perfectly coiffed strangers and fake smiling relatives, I feel small. Like I've stepped into a world I was never supposed to touch. And maybe that's the point. That's exactly what Vanessa wanted. This isn't just a misunderstanding. It never was. This was orchestrated. From the moment I opened that cream-colored envelope 2 weeks ago, a formal invitation to the annual Hope for Children Benefit Gala hosted by the Matthews Family Foundation. My father's legacy, I had a gut feeling something was off. That card wasn't an olive branch, it was bait, and I walked right into it. I try to speak, but the words get caught in my throat. I reach into my small clutch, fumbling for the invitation. My fingers shake. I was invited, I managed to say softly to the approaching security guard who looks sympathetic but cautious. "My name is on the list. I have the card here." From across the room, Vanessa's voice cuts in again, syrupy and venomous. "Oh, honey," she says, "that's just a courtesy copy. We send those to extended family. It wasn't a real invitation." "But I suppose you misunderstood again." The laughter is louder this time. My stepsister Brooklyn, of course, is already filming. Her iPhone is aimed straight at me, capturing every second of this performance. Her red lips curl upward in delight. "Maybe she just wanted to see how the other half lives," she says loud enough for her group of equally shallow society friends to titter behind their hands. And then, just as I think I might crumble, just as I feel my dignity begin to slip, the ballroom doors swing open behind me, and every head turns. He strides into the room like a shadow slicing through a spotlight. Ryan Drake, 6'2", broad-shouldered, dressed in a classic black tuxedo that probably costs more than Vanessa's entire ensemble. But it isn't just the suit or the fact that he's devastatingly handsome. It's the quiet confidence, the command he carries naturally, like gravity shifts around him when he walks into a space. His eyes scan the room and find me. Instantly. "Sabrina," he says, his voice steady, strong. The silence that follows is louder than any insult Vanessa ever hurled at me. The entire room stills. Security freezes in his tracks. Phones lower. Glasses stop mid-air. Ryan walks straight toward me, takes my hand like nothing else exists in the room, and says, "What's going on here? Why is my wife being harassed at an event she helped fund?" The air cracks open. Someone gasps audibly. And just like that, everything changes. You're probably wondering how we got here, how a girl like me raised in a wealthy, respected family could end up being humiliated like a stranger at her own father's legacy event. To understand that you'd need to go back to when everything still felt perfect. My full name is Sabrina Joy Cole, daughter of Jeffrey Cole, tech innovator and founder of ColeNet Technologies, once dubbed the Steve Jobs of clean data infrastructure. My mother, Clara, was the heart to his mind, a brilliant interior designer who ran her own studio and had an eye for turning cold, modern spaces into places that felt like home. Until I was 10, my life looked like something out of a magazine. We lived in a sprawling modern home in Pasadena with white oak floors, abstract art on every wall, and a lemon tree in the backyard that my mom adored. We had family dinners every night, even when Dad was pulling 16-hour days launching his software. And on weekends, he'd let me crawl into his office chair and approve mock-ups while he walked me through whatever project he was obsessing over. But everything changed when cancer entered the picture. My mom was diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer just after my 10th birthday. It was aggressive, fast, cruel. Within 6 months, she was gone. That house, our house, went silent. Dad stopped playing music in the kitchen. The lemon tree in the backyard withered because no one remembered to water it. And me, I disappeared into grief, just a kid trying to figure out where to put all that pain. For the next 2 years, it was just Dad and me. Or really me and a rotation of housekeepers and nannies while Dad buried himself in work to avoid dealing with the reality that our family had been cut in half. Then came Vanessa. She entered our lives like a commercial break, polished, practiced, and perfectly timed. I remember the first time I saw her. She was standing at a charity fundraiser for STEM education wearing a silver gown and holding a flute of champagne like she'd been born in high society. I thought she was a celebrity. She introduced herself to me like I was a business contact, not a child. But she smiled and told me she loved kids, especially girls with creative spirits. I was 11 and desperate for maternal affection. Of course I believed her. Within a year, she and my father were married. And she moved into our home, bringing along her daughter Brooklyn, who was my age but seemed to have skipped over kindness in favor of charm and competition. She had that type of beauty that made teachers forgive her for turning in late assignments and made friends orbit around her like moons. At first, I was excited to have a sister. We shared a hallway, a bathroom, and weekend brunches where she would dramatically talk about which friend was copying her outfits. But the favoritism didn't take long to creep in. She got the larger bedroom. The bathroom became hers exclusively. My dad started using words like, "You're so self-sufficient, Sabrina," while praising Brooklyn's every basic accomplishment as if she'd discovered fire. Christmas mornings were the worst. Brooklyn had a mountain of color-coordinated name-tagged gifts. I got what I needed: a sketchbook, pencils, a sweater. Brooklyn got a trip to New York with Vanessa. It didn't help that Vanessa treated me like a well-mannered inconvenience. "Sabrina, could you use the guest bathroom from now on?" Brooklyn's sensitive about her space. "Sabrina, I know you wanted art supplies, but Brooklyn needs ballet equipment and tutoring. This month we'll see about next quarter, okay?" Bit by bit, I was being erased. My father didn't even notice. Vanessa monopolized his time so efficiently, it was like she studied emotional chess. She'd schedule family picnics during my art exhibitions. She'd cook elaborate dinners and guilt him into skipping the one soccer game I actually made varsity for. I still remember overhearing her one night in the hallway. My door was cracked open and I was sketching by moonlight. "I'm trying, Jeff," she whispered, voice trembling in all the right places. "I just don't know how to reach her. She's always so distant." "She's been through a lot," he mumbled back. "Just give her time." She didn't want time. She wanted territory. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to stay quiet, stay out of the way, and take care of myself. I worked part-time at a bookstore to save for college. I kept my grades up, and I applied for scholarships behind everyone's backs just in case. There were still moments when my father showed glimpses of the man I remembered. He came to my senior art show alone and looked at my paintings with tears in his eyes. "You have your mother's soul," he whispered, voice shaking. She would have been so proud. I didn't know that would be one of the last real moments we'd have. The summer after my freshman year of college, he had a massive stroke. Gone in an instant. I got the call from Brooklyn's phone. I arrived at the hospital too late to say goodbye. And the funeral. It wasn't a farewell. It was a showcase. Vanessa in black Chanel. Brooklyn crying into her silk gloves. and me sitting in the fourth row next to people I barely knew, invisible. But the real blow came during the reading of the will. My father left everything, the estate, the company shares, the trust, to Vanessa and Brooklyn. Me. He left me a modest education fund that covered the rest of my college tuition and a one-time inheritance of $25,000. Enough for a used car and maybe 6 months of rent in Los Angeles. I confronted Vanessa, and she didn't even flinch. "Your father believed in teaching responsibility," she said smoothly, sipping from her imported water bottle. "Brooklyn has different needs." I'll never forget the way she said that word. Different. Like I was defective. Like I hadn't just lost a father, I was being punished for it. 2 weeks later, she handed me a cardboard box and told me I should start fresh somewhere else. No family dinner, no memorial keepsake, no goodbye. Just like that, I was out. I left with a suitcase, a used car, and my mother's last name tucked somewhere deep in my heart. Sabrina Cole. The girl no one thought would matter. And for a while, maybe I believed that too. I didn't cry when I left the house I grew up in. Maybe it was because I'd already mourned the loss of that version of my life long before I packed the last of my things. Or maybe it was because somewhere deep inside I knew I couldn't afford to fall apart anymore, not when no one else would be there to catch the pieces. So I started over. Alone. I moved into a 400-square-foot studio apartment in Venice Beach, 2 blocks from the boardwalk, with squeaky floors and a water heater that coughed like an old man in winter. The only art on the walls was mine charcoal sketches, mostly on warped paper from a local supply shop that gave student discounts. I worked part-time at Grayson Gallery, a modest art space known for taking chances on emerging local talent. I made coffee runs, cataloged pieces, swept floors, and occasionally helped organize pop-up shows. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Most of the time, people assumed I was just another broke art kid trying to find herself in LA, and I let them. It was easier than explaining who I used to be, who I was related to. I kept my head down, worked late, and avoided any contact with Vanessa or Brooklyn. The only time I heard from them was through the occasional generic holiday card, or worse, when my name appeared on a foundation guest list by accident and they had to correct it. For a while, I thought that was all life had in store for me, and honestly, I was okay with that, because at least it was peaceful. And then Ryan Drake walked into the gallery. It was a gray, rainy Tuesday in early April, and I was alone working through inventory. We had just received a shipment of urban landscape sculptures from a rising street artist named Micah Kells. I was crouched in the back corner peeling bubble wrap from a jagged metal piece shaped like a deconstructed highway when I heard the chime of the front door. I stood brushing dust off my apron. "Hi there, I'll be right with you." And then I saw him. He was tall, a little damp from the drizzle in jeans and a button-down shirt, clean cut, hands in his pockets, not trying too hard to look casual. Just unassuming. At first, he looked like every other art collector trying to be low-key. But when he turned and gave me a nod, I saw something different. His eyes, hazel and oddly kind, weren't scanning the room for price tags. He was actually looking at the work. Slowly, thoughtfully. "Anything in particular you're interested in?" I asked. "Not yet," he replied with a soft smile. "But I'm intrigued by this one." He gestured toward a painting I'd just mounted that morning. Lucia Mendez, another newcomer whose work on emotional isolation in city life had started gaining traction. "That piece," I said, stepping beside him. "She uses negative space to mirror internal silence. That's why the buildings feel hollow." He nodded, arms crossed. "It's subtle but unsettling." I like that. We spent nearly an hour walking the space. He asked about technique, artist backgrounds, themes, more questions than most collectors bothered to form, and he actually listened to my answers. At one point, I caught myself laughing at something he said about how corporate software lacks soul, and I realized I hadn't laughed like that in months. As he was leaving, he handed me a card. "I'm interested in supporting a few of these artists," he said. "If you're open to continuing the conversation over coffee." It wasn't until he walked out and I looked down at the card that my jaw dropped. Ryan Drake, CEO, Drake Tech Innovations. I stared at the name for a full minute. This was the man whose name appeared on business headlines, TED Talks, and university innovation panels. the same man who'd been on the cover of Wired just 2 months ago for his AI energy infrastructure project. And he wanted to have coffee with me. We met at a little cafe 2 blocks down later that week. Coffee turned into an extended conversation, which turned into dinner when neither of us noticed the place closing around us. Ryan was nothing like I expected. He didn't lead with accomplishments or money. He talked about his childhood in Seattle, his parents both public school teachers who supported his ideas even when he dropped out of grad school to chase a risky startup. He told me about living off instant ramen and homemade granola his mom mailed from Washington, about pitching software while crashing on a friend's couch. And I surprised myself by opening up too. Not about everything, not yet. But I told him about the gallery, about how much I loved connecting artists to collectors who actually cared about the message behind the work. I told him about my dream of opening a space one day that blended art and therapy where kids could heal through creation instead of just talking. He looked at me for a moment and said, "You're not just curating art, you're curating healing." That sentence stayed with me long after he walked me home. We started seeing each other regularly. He'd bring lunch to the gallery. I'd meet him for late dinners after his board meetings. He invited me to his townhouse, modest by tech billionaire standards, and I saw for myself that his minimalist life wasn't for show. He didn't drive anything flashy. He didn't care about impressing people. He only cared about impact. And still, I didn't tell him about Vanessa, or Brooklyn, or my father's will. For 3 months, I lived in the moment, afraid that if I brought my past into it, it would taint whatever this was becoming. But of course, Ryan noticed. We were on his rooftop one warm June evening, watching the sun melt over the city skyline, when he asked gently, "You never talk about your family." I hesitated, swirling the wine in my glass. "There's not much to say," I lied. He didn't push. He just looked at me and waited, quiet, patient, open. So I told him everything about my mother, about Vanessa, about Brooklyn's manipulation and my father's blind eye, about being left out of the will, about being told that my dreams were impractical, that my art was a waste, that I should be grateful for scraps. The words came out shakier than I expected. I hadn't said them aloud before, not all at once, not to someone who looked at me like I mattered. Ryan didn't interrupt. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "That's awful." He simply took my hand in his and said, "They failed you, Sabrina." Not the other way around. And just like that, something inside me shifted. A knot I didn't realize I'd been carrying for years came undone. From that night forward, I didn't feel like I was hiding anymore. And slowly, Ryan became not just someone I trusted, but someone I couldn't imagine my life without. 1 year later, on a quiet stretch of beach in Santa Barbara, just as the sun disappeared into the horizon, he knelt in the sand and asked me to marry him. "I love you for your strength," he said, "and your softness, for your eye for beauty and your refusal to let pain turn you bitter. You've changed the way I see the world, Sabrina. I want to face whatever comes next with you beside me." We were married 2 months later in a small ceremony at his parents' home in Seattle. No fanfare, just 30 people, a string quartet, and a late-night bonfire where his mom hugged me and whispered, "We're so lucky he found you." No one from my side was there. There was no one to invite. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. Marrying Ryan was like stepping into a parallel life, one that felt so radically different from the one I'd left behind. I sometimes wondered if it was happening to someone else. Not because of the wealth or the travel or the home, though all of that was very real, but because for the first time I was safe. Safe to be seen. Safe to love. Safe to grow without being scrutinized. We moved into a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, just far enough from the chaos of Manhattan to feel like our own quiet world. I kept my job at the gallery by choice and even took on more curatorial responsibilities. I told Ryan I didn't want his name to be the reason doors opened for me. I wanted to walk through them myself. He respected that. Always had. We spent weekends going to local museums, adopting a rescue dog named Olive, and planning a program to integrate art therapy into underserved public schools. Ryan encouraged me to launch a community art initiative I'd dreamed up in college, but never had the resources to build. By the time our second anniversary rolled around, I'd helped open our first pilot program in Harlem. It was by all measures a beautiful life. And then, one Tuesday in October, the envelope arrived. It was tucked between bills and junk mail, almost easy to miss. But the paper stock was thick and smooth, and the return address was embossed in gold Matthews Family Foundation. My stomach turned before I even opened it. I stared at it for several minutes, frozen. The past had been silent for so long, too long for this to be random. I hadn't heard a word from Vanessa or Brooklyn in over 2 years. The last time I'd seen either of them was at my father's funeral, where I was strategically seated behind a flower arrangement and asked to not be emotional. I finally peeled the envelope open with shaking fingers. Inside was an invitation to the annual Hope for Children Benefit Gala, hosted in Los Angeles at the Wilshire Grand Hotel. Attached was a short handwritten note in Vanessa's unmistakably dramatic cursive, "Sabrina, it's been too long. We'd love to reconnect. The family misses you. Warmly, Vanessa." It wasn't signed, Mom. It never had been. I set the card down and just stared at it. My hands, usually steady, were trembling. That night when Ryan came home from the office, I was still sitting at the kitchen island, staring blankly at the envelope like it might explode if I blinked. "Hey," he said, stepping behind me to kiss my cheek. "You okay?" I handed him the invitation without saying a word. He read the note. Then again. His brows furrowed. "She sent you this?" he asked carefully. I nodded. He looked at the envelope again, then exhaled through his nose in a way I knew meant he was calculating something. "Sabrina, that event, Hope for Children, do you know who's funding it this year?" I raised an eyebrow. "No." "Should I?" Ryan hesitated. "The Drake Foundation is the primary donor this cycle, through our anonymous grant program. We've been sponsoring their pediatric arts program for over a year. My name's not publicly tied to it, but we're essentially paying for the entire gala." It took a few seconds for that to register. "You're saying the woman who tried to erase me from my father's legacy is unknowingly using your money to host a benefit?" Ryan gave me a sheepish shrug. "Looks like it." I stared at him, stunned. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Do you think she knows?" "Doubt it," he replied. "Our foundation staff manages the lower-tier grants. She probably never saw the details." I sat back in my chair, the room spinning just slightly. This is insane. She wants something he said simply. Or she found out you married me. That note is bait. I didn't respond. Because he was right. Every instinct in my body screamed, this wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about family. It was about control, about optics. But what shook me the most wasn't the invitation. It was how much it still affected me. After all these years, after everything I'd built, after a marriage full of love, a career I was proud of, and a life I'd made on my own terms. One envelope could still make me feel like a 19-year-old girl being shoved out of her childhood bedroom with a cardboard box and no goodbye. I hated that. "I'm not going," I said firmly. Ryan didn't argue, not at first. But after a long pause, he leaned across the counter, resting his forearms in front of me. "What if you did?" I looked at him like he'd suggested I walk into traffic. "Why would I do that?" He held my gaze. "Because you're not that girl anymore. And maybe, just maybe, you deserve to walk into that room and hold your head high. On your terms, not theirs." I swallowed hard. "You think I need closure?" "I think you've already won," he said gently. "But sometimes it's powerful to see the people who tried to break you and realize they don't matter anymore." I turned the invitation over in my hands. "You'd go with me." Ryan gave a small smile. "I was thinking you go alone first. I show up later." I blinked. "Why?" He leaned closer, a glint of mischief in his eye. "Because the shock value of me walking in after Vanessa's tried to humiliate you again, priceless." I laughed despite myself. "You're ridiculous." "Maybe, but also right." I hated how much the idea intrigued me. What if I didn't hide from them this time? What if I went not for them but for me, to show them they hadn't broken me, that they had never even come close? "I'll think about it," I said quietly. He He reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. That's all I'm asking. Over the next 2 weeks, I warred with myself. Every time I thought about that ballroom, the cameras, the sneering smiles, I felt a visceral panic in my chest. But then I'd remember the version of me who walked out of that family home with nothing and built everything. I remembered the kids I'd helped through art therapy. I remembered the woman Ryan saw when he looked at me. And I remembered I wasn't that scared, invisible girl anymore. So I said yes. We planned it carefully. I'd arrive first alone. Ryan would arrive exactly 45 minutes later after dinner began, when Vanessa would be feeling confident and comfortable. If she tried anything, the reveal would be hers to walk into. I chose a dress that said everything I didn't need to say out loud. Midnight blue satin backless. Simple but bold. It was made by a designer whose work I'd helped launch. It didn't scream wealth. It whispered elegance with teeth. The night before the gala, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, nerves twisting inside me like vines. What if I walk in? And they do it again, I whispered. What if they find a new way to humiliate me? Ryan turned to me, his voice steady. Then I'll walk in, take your hand, and remind every single person in that room exactly who you are. I closed my eyes. I didn't need their acceptance anymore. But maybe, just maybe, I needed to see that for myself. The Wilshire Grand Hotel ballroom sparkled like a dream if your dreams included high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and more champagne than self-awareness. I arrived at 6:55 p.m., exactly 5 minutes early. Just enough time to compose myself without looking over-eager. The valet took my car with a courteous nod. I adjusted the hem of my gown, midnight blue satin, a clean silhouette with a dipped back, and stepped inside. The entrance was a flurry of cameras, velvet ropes, and overly whitened teeth. I gave my name, Sabrina Cole, to the woman at the check-in table, who smiled politely and tapped her tablet. Yes, Ms. Cole, you're on the list. Welcome to the Hope for Children Benefit Gala. The first wave of anxiety began to lift. I was in. As I entered the ballroom, I moved like I was floating, not because I felt confident, but because I wasn't sure my feet were touching the ground. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters in white gloves offered oysters on silver trays. Gold accents glittered off every surface. And standing near the center of it all, surrounded by a cluster of Los Angeles's social elite, was Vanessa. She hadn't changed. Still breathtakingly elegant, still dressed like she lived in the pages of Town and Country, and still possessing that rare ability to make cruelty look like charm. Her eyes met mine. There was a flicker of surprise, then calculation. Sabrina, she said, her voice just loud enough to draw attention. What a surprise! I wouldn't miss it, I said, voice even. The invite was more symbolic, she replied smoothly. But how thoughtful of you to interpret it so literally. People nearby turned, already sensing blood in the water. Brooklyn appeared at Vanessa's side, sipping something pink from a coupe glass. Didn't think you'd show, she said, eyeing my gown. That's bold. Off the rack, I smiled politely. Custom, designed by one of our featured artists at Westfield Gallery. Vanessa's smile thinned. Oh, still with that little art shop. I'm the assistant director now. Charming, she said. Still chasing that little dream, I see. A man next to us, his name tag reading David R. Hospital board, tilted his head toward me. You work in the arts. She has creative aspirations, Vanessa answered for me. Nothing formal, of course. Actually, I started. I simply must tell you about our new pediatric wing. Vanessa interrupted, pivoting away before I could speak. I was dismissed. I backed away, heart pounding, mouth dry. I told myself to breathe. This was all part of the plan. I needed to last 45 minutes. Just enough time. Brooklyn followed me into the quiet corner near the silent auction. Seriously? She said, her voice sharp now that no one was watching. Why are you here? We invited you out of pity. Vanessa didn't think you'd have the nerve. I'm not here for her, I replied. I'm here because the cause matters, and my husband will be joining me shortly. She blinked. You're married? Yes. To who you'll meet him. I didn't give her time to press. I turned away, picked up a glass of water, and tried to calm the shaking in my hands. And that's when it happened. The music stopped. Vanessa stepped up to the microphone at the front of the ballroom, her smile gleaming. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the annual Hope for Children Gala. Your generosity means the world to so many young lives." She continued with the usual platitudes, funding goals, community partnerships, applause for major donors, none of whom were me, of course. Then her eyes found me again. "And finally, we must give a round of applause to our incredible event staff who've helped tonight run so smoothly." She paused, smiled wider. "In fact, it appears one of our servers may have misplaced her uniform this evening." A ripple of laughter. "I'm so sorry for the confusion," she said, gaze locked on me now. But guests should use the main entrance. Staff were directed to come in through the service corridor. Gasps, murmurs, heads turned. Laughter, some polite, some cruel, began to fill the room. I froze. Brooklyn stepped up beside her, lifting her phone recording. "Don't be mad, Mom," she said, grinning. "Maybe Sabrina just wanted to cosplay wealth for one night." Louder laughter. I stood still, champagne glass in hand, spine-locked, straight blood roaring in my ears. "Security," Vanessa called sweetly. "Could you please assist our guest to the correct area?" A man in a black suit moved toward me, hesitant. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with me." "I was invited," I whispered. Vanessa approached with a show of false concern. "Sweetheart, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is for hospital patrons, not aspiring creatives." My cousin Brandon chimed in from across the room, voice laced with mockery. "Remember when she showed up to Grandma's birthday and cried because she wasn't in the family photo classic Sabrina?" "You don't belong here," someone else muttered. Brooklyn's camera stayed trained on me the entire time. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. "Not here, not again." "I have the invitation," I said, reaching into my clutch. "You invited me." "That's a courtesy copy," Vanessa snapped. "You misunderstood." "You always do." "Please," the security guard said. "Let's not make a scene." And then, before I could speak again, the ballroom doors opened. And in stepped Ryan. He moved like thunder-crisp tuxedo, broad shoulders, and a presence that made the room hold its breath. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused in mid-air. He walked through the crowd like Moses parting the sea. And when he reached me, he didn't hesitate. He took my hand and said loud enough for everyone to hear Sabrina, "What's going on? Why is my wife surrounded by security?" The room gasped. "Wife." Vanessa went pale. Brooklyn lowered her phone, stunned. The security guard immediately dropped his arm from mine and stepped back. Vanessa recovered first. "Mr. Drake," she said with forced poise. "What a delightful surprise." "I know exactly who you are," Ryan replied coldly. "And I heard everything." She opened her mouth, but he cut her off. "I'm the founder of the Drake Foundation, the anonymous benefactor who made tonight possible. And you just tried to publicly humiliate my wife." Whispers erupted. Shock, recognition. Phones rose again, but this time to capture her. Brooklyn looked like she wanted to disappear. "We had no idea," Vanessa stammered. "If we'd known she was—" "That's the problem," Ryan said. "Her worth doesn't depend on who she married. She's brilliant, talented, and she was always enough, even before she had my name." He turned to the crowd. "For those of you watching this unfold, understand this wealth doesn't make you valuable. Compassion does. Kindness does. Integrity does." Vanessa said nothing. Couldn't. I found my voice, then steady and clear. "You wanted to erase me?" I said, locking eyes with her. "But you forgot one thing. I survived without you, and I never needed to prove anything to people who refused to see me." Ryan smiled beside me, proud. I turned back to the security guard. "Thank you. I believe my seat is at the front. We're the gala's primary donors, after all." He nodded and stepped aside. We walked together across the ballroom hand in hand toward the head table, leaving behind silence, disbelief, and the ruins of their carefully manufactured illusion. The The silence that followed us as we made our way to the head table was unlike any I'd ever known. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, thick with disbelief-wounded pride and the sharp sting of public embarrassment. Vanessa stood frozen by the stage, her perfect posture slightly slouched, her hand still clutching the microphone like it could somehow reverse time. Brooklyn looked shell-shocked, holding her phone like it had betrayed her. Cousin Brandon nowhere to be found. The whispers followed us, of course. Even as the band tried to recover, fumbling their way back into soft background music, there was no mistaking the shift in the room. The crowd's tone had changed. Their stares weren't mocking, now they were cautious, uncertain, some even sympathetic. Ryan and I sat down at the table adorned with white orchids and gold place settings. A server, suddenly flustered, poured us champagne without a word. "You okay?" Ryan asked quietly, placing his hand over mine. I nodded, and I meant it, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless in that room. For years, I had imagined facing Vanessa again, how I'd tremble, how I'd shrink under her polished smile and pointed words. But I wasn't the same girl she'd shoved out of her house with a cardboard box and a dismissive wave. I wasn't even the woman trying to prove something. I was simply myself, whole, and standing beside a man who loved me for all the right reasons. After dinner was served and after a very mechanical, soulless speech from Vanessa, thanking the anonymous donor she now very clearly recognized, several guests came by to introduce themselves. Not to Ryan, to me. A hospital board member named Evelyn leaned over and whispered, "We've heard about your foundation initiative in Harlem. I think the children's program could benefit from someone like you. Would you be open to meeting next week?" Of course, I said, surprised. Others followed. Some offered genuine praise for my work. Some offered transparent attempts at damage control, hoping I might forget how they'd laughed only an hour earlier. I smiled at all of them but held none of it close. I didn't need their validation. I never had. After the gala, Ryan and I slipped out through the side exit and walked hand in hand through the cool Los Angeles night. The city buzzed around us, but my mind was quiet, peaceful. That night in the hotel room, I got dozens of texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. Cousin Brandon sent a blurry photo of us as kids with the caption, "We should catch up sometime." No hard feelings, right? Vanessa sent a single-line email. "Let's talk soon. Family should stick together." Brooklyn, for all her talk, went quiet. Not a word. I didn't reply to any of them, but 3 days later I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. "Hi, Sabrina. It's your Aunt Meredith. I watched what happened at the gala. I wasn't there, but I saw the clips, and I wanted you to know not everyone agreed with how Vanessa treated you. Some of us were just afraid to say anything." There was a pause, a breath. "You deserved better. And I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you when it mattered. If you ever want to talk, I'd like to finally hear your side." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was honest. And it cracked something open in me. Over the next week, 2 more relatives reached out. Genuinely. Not with excuses, not with networking attempts just to apologize. To tell me they'd believed the lies, that they hadn't realized what I'd been going through. One message from my father's cousin Irene said, "He loved you, Sabrina. Your father. He kept photos of you in his private office, even after Vanessa redecorated the house. I wish I had told you that." I cried when I read that one. Not because I needed them back in my life, but because for the first time I felt like my pain was finally being seen. Still, I didn't reply to Vanessa or Brooklyn. Some people belong firmly in the past. Ryan supported whatever I chose. Closure doesn't require conversation, he told me one night. Sometimes walking away is the strongest answer. I believed him. But closure also looked like this: visiting my father's grave alone and telling him everything I'd become. Donating the bouquet Brandon sent to a children's cancer ward. Printing and framing my mother's favorite painting and hanging it in my home above the fireplace where power lives. Most importantly, closure meant letting go of the dream that one day those people would become the family I'd always needed. Because the truth was, I had already found my family. In Ryan. In his parents, who called me every Sunday. in the small circle of artist friends who believed in my vision before I had funding, in the kids at our workshops who told me things they couldn't say to their own families. I wasn't broken anymore. I was free. And that was more powerful than any invitation title or inheritance ever could be. 6 months after the gala on a warm spring evening in Brooklyn, Ryan and I stood side by side in a cozy gallery space-turned event hall lit softly with hanging lanterns and filled with people who mattered. No cameras, no society columns, no fake smiles, just real warmth, real support. This was the launch of the Clara Cole Foundation for Creative Healing, named after the mother who had once taught me to see beauty in broken things and in myself. The idea had been growing in my heart for years, a nonprofit that provided free art therapy to children experiencing grief trauma and family displacement. We'd already piloted the model in Harlem and received overwhelmingly positive feedback. Now we were ready to expand to Los Angeles, to Chicago, to places where kids needed more than just textbooks and diagnoses. They needed expression. They needed a safe place to put their pain. We'd rented a venue near the waterfront decorated with student art hung on linen cords across the walls. There were hand-stitched collages, finger-painted storms, portraits of missing mothers and silent fathers, and imaginary superheroes. There was a rawness to it all that no curated gallery could fake. This, I said to Ryan, feels like the only gala I ever want to attend again. He grinned and kissed the top of my head. No one here thinks you're staff, I promise. I'd proudly be staff, I laughed. I'd bust tables here if it meant more kids got the chance to heal. Then it was time for me to speak. I stepped up to the small podium, heart-calm voice steady. I looked around the room, not at donors but at believers, supporters, friends. The kind of chosen family I had once dreamed of but never thought could be real. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began. Not for me, but for the kids whose stories hang on these walls. Kids who've faced unthinkable loss, instability, and emotional wounds too big for words. I paused, breathing in the quiet. Art saved me once. When I was 11 years old after my mother passed away, I started drawing in a sketchbook I found in the back of her closet. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew it made the ache in my chest hurt less. It gave my silence a shape, my grief a color. I glanced at Ryan, whose eyes never left mine. For years, I thought I needed a certain kind of family to feel whole. That if I could just earn someone's love, just prove my worth, I'd finally feel like I belonged somewhere. Soft murmurs rippled across the room, gentle understanding, not pity, but I've learned that family isn't always inherited. Sometimes it's built. It's made of the people who show up for you when there's no spotlight, no legacy, no transaction, just care. I smiled as I concluded. This foundation isn't about charity. It's about dignity, about giving children the tools to tell their truth on their own terms, because healing begins the moment someone says, I see you, I believe you, your voice matters. Applause followed, genuine, heartfelt, not thunderous like at a fundraiser for clout, but steady and full of warmth, the kind that wraps around you like a well-worn sweater. Afterward, people came to shake my hand, not because of my name, not because of who I married, but because of what we were building. One woman, a school counselor from the Bronx, clutched my hand and said, "You don't know how many kids are going to find light because of this. You have no idea." Maybe not, but I was finally starting to believe it. Later that night, back at home, I curled up next to Ryan on the couch with Olive the dog, snoring at our feet and a slice of leftover cake between us. "You did it," he said, nudging my shoulder. "No," I replied. "We did." He smiled. "Your mom would be proud." I nodded slowly, and so would my dad. Maybe not the version of him Vanessa shaped, but the man who used to let me sketch on his office whiteboards, the man who told me I had her soul. Ryan grew quiet. "Have you thought about whether you want to reach out to anyone else?" I didn't need clarification. He meant Vanessa, Brooklyn, all the people who had tried in their own quiet ways to undo me. "I've thought about it," I said. "But honestly, I don't think they were ever family. They were just a chapter, and some chapters don't deserve sequels." He nodded without judgment. "Whatever you choose, I'll support it." That's the thing about being loved properly. It doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't demand performance. It just is. We sat there for a while in our quiet Brooklyn brownstone filled with laughter and art and all the parts of life that used to feel impossible. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who had packed up her childhood in silence and left a house that no longer felt like home. I wanted to reach back in time and tell her, you make it out. You make it whole. And not just whole. It's funny the way stories are shaped not by the loudest voices or even by who has the biggest stage, but by who chooses to keep writing when others try to end your chapter for you. For a long time, I thought my story ended the day Vanessa handed me that box and told me to leave. I thought being pushed out of my father's house meant I had no legacy. I thought being written out of his will meant I didn't matter, but the truth is, I've never mattered more than I do now, because I stopped living in the shadow of someone else's expectations and started creating something of my own. Something lasting. Something true. The Clara Cole Foundation has grown faster than I ever imagined. We now run after-school art therapy programs in 5 cities and provide paid internships for at-risk youth who want to explore careers in creative fields. We've partnered with pediatric hospitals. We've seen kids who wouldn't speak for weeks pick up a paintbrush and start to come back to life. One little girl, Marley, age 7, told me last month, "When I paint the monsters, they get smaller." That's why we do this. Not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, but to make room for someone else to breathe. I never responded to Vanessa's email. I didn't need to. Eventually, news spread that she'd quietly stepped down from the Matthews Foundation's board. Social circles faded. Apologies trickled in from people who had once stood silently beside her. Some wanted forgiveness. Some wanted access. I gave neither. Brooklyn tried to comment on one of my foundation posts a few weeks ago. Something vague about starting fresh. I blocked her. Without hesitation. Not out of spite, but out of peace. You don't have to set yourself on fire just because someone finally noticed the cold. Some bridges are meant to burn. Others were never bridges at all, just cliffs with a nice view of your fall. But this life I have now, this is mine. It's in the way. Ryan laughs when I argue about paint texture. It's in the way Olive curls beside my easel when I stay up too late working on a piece for a kids program. It's in every thank you card we get from a parent who says, "My child smiled today for the first time in months." It's in the way I can say my name out loud and not feel the need to explain or apologize. Sabrina Cole, wife, artist, founder, whole. If you've made it to the end of this story, maybe you've seen parts of yourself in these pages. Maybe you've felt erased, overlooked, told you were too sensitive or too much, or simply not enough. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. Your worth was never theirs to measure. You don't need their approval to matter. You don't need their permission to be brilliant. You don't need to prove your humanity to people who treat love like a prize you must win. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love is this: walking away from the people who make you feel small and building a world where you don't have to shrink to belong. You get to choose your ending. You get to write your next page. You get to become someone you never dreamed possible because you finally stopped asking broken people to give you a name they were never capable of pronouncing. So if you're standing at the edge of your own story, wondering if you're allowed to start again, let this be your sign you are. And you're not alone. We're out here too, building soft homes in hard places, loving loudly, healing quietly, and painting new doors where others tried to build walls. Welcome home. There's one last thing I want to share with you, something I've never said out loud. Sometimes when I'm in my office at the foundation after the staff has gone home and the city has gone quiet outside, I open my drawer and take out a letter I wrote but never mailed. It's addressed to Vanessa. It's written in my handwriting on thick paper folded 3 times. And this is what it says: Vanessa, you won. For a long time you did. You convinced my father that I was difficult. You convinced everyone else that I was dramatic, sensitive, ungrateful. You made me doubt my worth so deeply I almost didn't come back from it. But here's what you didn't realize. You never destroyed me. You just redirected me. You taught me who I didn't want to be. You showed me what happens when power is used to control instead of uplift. And in doing that, you gave me a strange kind of gift clarity. I don't hate you. I don't wish you harm. I just wish you peace because only deeply unhappy people try to break what they don't understand. I hope someday when the applause fades and the curated world you built begins to crack, you remember that there was someone who would have loved you as a mother if only you'd let her. But it's too late now. I've stopped waiting for the apology that will never come. I've stopped needing it. I've built a life that doesn't require your approval to feel meaningful, and that's freedom. Sabrina. I've never sent it. Maybe I never will. Some things are better left in drawers like old scars you've outgrown, but still carry when it rains. These days, my life is quieter, deeper, fuller. I run workshops for kids whose parents are battling addiction. I mentor teen artists who think no one will ever understand the chaos in their heads. I speak at schools where creativity is often the first thing cut from the budget. And sometimes, just sometimes, I stand at the back of a classroom watching a child paint something unspeakable onto canvas and I see myself. The younger version, the one no one protected, the one who drew houses with no doors and oceans that swallowed girls whole. And I want to whisper to her, look, you made it. One question I get asked a lot, especially after the gala video went viral, is, how did you forgive them? And the answer is, I didn't. Forgiveness for me wasn't necessary. What I needed wasn't reconciliation. It was release. Release from expectation, from old roles I never auditioned for, from the burden of always trying to be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't. What healed me wasn't their change. It was my choice to stop bleeding for their comfort. I chose boundaries over bitterness, purpose over pity, creation over confrontation. That's how I found peace. If you're still here, reading, listening, wondering if you're strong enough to walk away from your own, Vanessa, your own version of Brooklyn, your own aching need to be chosen. Let me say this clearly, you already are. You don't need anyone's permission to begin again. You don't need to carry the shame they handed you, and you certainly don't need to keep drinking from a well that only poisons your self-worth. Find your people. Find your peace. And if you can't find it, create it. That's what I did. With paint, with paper, with faith that I could be whole without a blueprint. Now I give that to others, and now maybe I give that to you. Thank you for letting me share my story, not because it's perfect, but because it's true. And if it helps you take one brave step toward the life you deserve, then everything I went through was worth it. With love, Sabrina.